Video 2 on our series on Michael Singer's Living Untethered, the outside world, coming up right after this. Hey everyone, this is Yoel, and if you're watching on YouTube, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So grateful to have you. And we're continuing on in our series on Michael Singer's Living Untethered. If you missed the first video, obviously you can go back. I'll try and remember to link that above, but in case I forget, there is video 1 as well as an introduction. And it's important to go through this in order because Michael Singer goes through very methodically his ideas and thoughts and perspectives and how to grow spiritually using the principles that he's learned and passed on to us. So without further ado, this week's video, we're moving right along into the outside world. If you remember from the first video, Singer talks about the idea of the three-ring circus, meaning the outside are, what we observe around us, we being you. I'm going to say you again, just to always remind you, and I'll probably remind you a lot throughout my videos that I'm not speaking down to you. I say you as the viewer, but I'm obviously speaking to myself as well. I learn a ton just by passing on this information. I don't claim to be a guru. Michael Singer is really the guru here. He would probably tell you he's not a guru, but I would say he is a guru. And so when we say you, it's the you who's observing everything around you. And what does that consist of? So Singer calls that a three-ring circus, consisting of 1, the outside world, 2 are your thoughts coming from your mind, and 3 are your feelings and emotions. So the first part of that three-ring circus is the outside world, and that's what we're going to talk about now in this section, video 2. Okay, now, so Singer starts off the exploration of the outside world by reminding us of what it is that puts us on solid ground, okay? Because that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get ourselves back into solid ground, make sure we're being as conscious as we can. And what puts us into solid ground is you. You are that anchor. You are the solid ground. You are the observer, okay? And again, also to remind you, if you have any burning questions or anything like that, you can always put those questions in on YouTube if you're watching it there, and I'll do my best to respond to those, and I always welcome feedback as well. But for the time being, what I would say is to, as I said last time, put it on the blackboard, okay? That's what a teacher of mine used to say. So try and suspend any sort of burning questions just to be able to absorb what you can from the lesson, and then you can ask your questions, and I'll be happy to do my best to answer those, being that sort of proxy for Michael Singer. Okay, so Singer talks about the idea of being in solid ground. That solid ground person is you. And the issue is, though, that we lose that solid ground because we get lost in that three-ring circus I talked about. We get lost in those outside circumstances that are happening. I've used COVID as an example, the idea of the thoughts of our mind. I used road rage as an example of our thoughts and things that we may say. And then there's feelings and emotions of anger that may arise as a result of those thoughts. And we really get lost into those things. And what Singer says is that we get lost in the objects, okay, key word, the objects of consciousness, instead of focusing on the source of consciousness. Who's the source of consciousness? You are that source, but we tend to lose ourselves. You lose yourself into the objects around you as part of that three-ring circus. And spiritual awakening, Singer says, is that untangling. I love the way he says that. It's the untangling of consciousness from the objects of consciousness, okay? Rather than being caught up in it, which is how we're conditioned, which is how we've grown up, our surroundings. We're kind of conditioned to be caught up in it. But really, if you remind yourself of you being the conscious observer, and you're not the objects of consciousness, but you yourself are the one who is watching yourself, watching those thoughts, watching what happens around you, then you can bring yourself back to solid ground. But the problem is we get all tangled up in it. And what we want to do is we want to try and untangle ourselves. Okay, now to help untangle ourselves, Singer says, it makes sense to understand the first part of this three-ring circus, which is the outside world. Okay, like what's out there, Singer asks. Where did it come from? And what's your relationship to it? By the way, I'm looking down at notes over here. I've got a notebook where I jot everything down. So when I look away from the camera, forgive me. I wish I could speak off the cuff. Singer could do it amazingly. He just goes. I'm not at that point. At this point, I have to look down at my notes, but that's what I'm looking at over here when I look away from the camera. Okay, so he asks those questions like, what's out there? What's going on? What is this outside world that we're speaking of? And he continues with the discussion of moments. Okay, so we're always surrounded by moments. Every second, every instance is another moment, right? Right now, there's a moment. Again, there's a moment. There's another moment. There's a moment to the left. There's a moment to the right. Something's happening there. Something's happening here. Something's happening all around us. Something's happening in a completely different part of the world. Something's happening in the galaxy, in the planets, the stars. Okay, these are all moments. And what Singer says is, the moment in front of you, you may think it's got everything to do with you. So for example, somebody comes up to you and says something nasty to you. That was a moment that just occurred. And you may think that that has everything to do with you. What are you talking about? He just said this to me. But really, that's just a passing moment. Okay. And we're going to elaborate on this as we go on. So to help really understand that, think about all the moments that are going on in the world. So somebody said that to you and insulted you. That was a moment that happened. But think about the person who's, let's say you're watching this from Florida, but there's another person, halfway around the world in China, for example. Okay. So the moment that happened to you here in Florida, and again, I'm saying happened to you, I'm kind of falling into that language as well. It's really the moment that you observed happening was a moment that somebody in China didn't observe, but it doesn't take away from the fact that this moment occurred, whether or not you're sitting in Florida or whether or not you're sitting in China. Okay, but the point is that even though you really feel like that this moment is personal, when you think about it from the perspective of the person who's not in Florida with you, who's in China, that moment has nothing to do with him, right, or her. And it doesn't. I'm just using an extreme example. It could be even somebody sitting next to you, right? So if somebody, third person, came and insulted you, and not the person sitting right next to you, you could tend to make that personal for you. But the person sitting right next to you, that's not a personal moment to him or her. What do they care? The person didn't say it to them. Yes, you can get into if they want to defend your honor, blah, 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 blah. But the point I'm making is that the moment is not personal. It's a moment that happened in time, okay? And that's what Singer says. It doesn't have to be personal. This may sound very shocking to you because that's the way we're conditioned to think, like, how dare this person say that to me? Or it addressed me. So of course it's personal to me. But as we'll talk about as we go on and on in the videos, and as Singer goes through in his book, the moment is really not personal to you. You make it personal, but the moment itself is not really personal. Okay. And the reason why you suffer is because when you make it personal and it doesn't align with what you think should happen or should have been said or should not have been said, or what a person should or shouldn't do, what's customary is not customary. I know people who are constantly getting upset at certain things that other people do because they say it's not customary. How can they do that? And they don't realize that they're completely making certain arbitrary rules. And I say arbitrary, to them it doesn't seem arbitrary, but if you take that rule and measure it against what somebody else's rules and norms are, it is arbitrary. Now, again, you may have a question, well, what do you do with the idea of murder and, serious criminal offenses and things of that nature? Okay, I'm not going to get into that, what's customary, civilized society, etc. That's a whole deeper discussion. I don't want to jump ahead right now. You can put that on the blackboard. But the point is that the moments themselves as they're occurring are not personal to any one person, okay? And that's really what you're trying to do unwittingly, almost unconsciously really, is you're trying to stick your personal preferences onto the moment, as opposed to letting the moment hit you and accept and absorb the moment and observe it. You're making it personal. You're making it about you. And that's what accounts for getting entangled in that. And we really want to untangle ourselves from that, to get unenmeshed in that personal preference area of moments. We want to move ourselves out, kind of like zoom out and be able to observe moments as they're happening rather than being caught up inside of them. And that's what Singer says. He talks about the idea of surrendering our habitual way of looking at things. Our habitual way is, like I said, to look at things very personally. That person insulted me. It's personal to me. But we can move out of it. And I've very grateful to say that I've been able to do that in many instances in my life, personal experiences, the way I viewed somebody in the past with some time in spiritual development. And again, I'm not a guru. I'm not saying this arrogantly. I'm not trying to, is that I've been able to look at that perspective completely different. Now, what changed? Nothing really changed. All that changed was how me in this instance, but this could be you as well, are observing something. Okay, the actual moment that occurred was the same moment. Okay, so I used to look at, I could use divorce as an example. I used to look at certain events that happen in divorce very personally. My ego didn't like it. I judged it in a certain way. I preferred for it not to be happening or to happen in a different way. And now I have a different perspective, oftentimes, on different things that occurred in the past. Now, how did that happen? The moment didn't change. The moment happened at that time. But it's just me being able to sort of zoom out and be able to observe it as a conscious observer, as opposed to getting myself stuck in it and entangled in it. And you can all think of examples for yourself as well. I use myself as an example because I'm the speaker here, but all of you can think of different events that occurred where you may have looked at it one way and now you've looked at it in another way. There may be events that you look at the same way today as you looked at it 20 years ago. I'm not saying that with judgment or criticism in any way, but think of times where you observed something and you viewed it one way and later on you viewed it another way. And just consider how that moment didn't change. It's the way you observed it that changed. So that should be an inspiring way of understanding that just because something happened, it doesn't mean that it has any sort of personal relationship to you. It's more about you sticking your personality onto that moment, but the moment itself is still that sort of objective moment, instant in time. Okay, so what Singer says, is to sum that up, is that it's not the moment that's bothering you, you're bothering yourself about the moment. Truer words have not been spoken. Now, after the Singer gets into a whole discussion in his book, and it is worthwhile to read. I think it's too in-depth for me to get into it in this video, but he kind of geeks out, as the saying goes. He gets into a whole geeky discussion, if you will, about the science and the origin of matter, although I know a lot of you out there really love the science behind it. I personally am not such a science guy, but I understand why Singer goes through that, because he's demonstrating how none of this has anything to do with us. This has to do whether or not you believe in God or the universe or how the world was created, the Big Bang. Don't get bogged down in those details, okay? There's room for everybody to have their own opinions by what transpired, but everybody agrees that there was scientific matter at play here, where the universe did come into existence, and then there's stars and galaxies and atoms and energy and particles, and there's all sorts of scientific data to back that up. So if you are a science person, you will definitely appreciate Singer's discussion on this. But even if you're not, just to have a general idea of the fact that the universe is there, whether you like it or not, and it has nothing to do with you, you certainly didn't create it. It helps you understand just how much any of these moments that are happening in this universe that you really had nothing to do with have, these moments, the universe that you had nothing to do with, the moments in those universe also have nothing to do with you, in the sense that they're not personal to you. Okay, and Singer uses a comical example, but it really underscores the point. He says that it took billions of years for the universe to get to this moment. And think about the guy who says, well, this happened, and it may have taken billions of years, but I don't like it. Think about how funny that sounds, okay? So many things had to happen to get to this very moment in time, okay? So maybe somebody doesn't like the idea of it raining outside. Okay, Singer doesn't say this, but I'm adding to that. Although he does talk about rain later on in the book, and we'll get to in the videos, about the idea of low-hanging fruit and not being nothing for you to do about the fact that it's raining outside, but we make that personal too. I don't like that it's raining. Well, what happened? How did the rain come about? Well, there were clouds and there was condensation. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm not even going to try. But the point is that those clouds that are bringing down rain right now have really nothing to do with you. So it's very funny. It's comical to say, like, I don't like it. Well, who are you to say you don't like it? It's got nothing to do with you. It's the universe that's unfolding, whether you like it or not. So spirituality is really letting go of that part of you, Singer says, that feels that you have this right to like or dislike. Okay, you can accept it. Okay, we have that choice to accept what's happening without trying to put our personal preferences into it. Now, I had this question when I read the book, so I just want to point out here, Singer does talk about this because he's gotten questions about this. You don't have to be funny about it. In other words, like, people have said, like, oh, so does that mean if I don't have likes or dislikes, so I can't say I like pizza? No, of course you can. You don't have to get all goofy and silly. We're talking about broader spiritual concepts here, the idea of trying to stick our personal preferences onto individual moments. But nobody's saying you can't say, like, I'd rather have pizza today than hamburgers. It's okay to have preferences. Don't get all weird about it. As Singer puts it himself, I think he says that. Okay, so that may have been a question that I'm anticipating that you may have. But the point is to be able to understand generally in a much larger perspective. That's what it's about. It's about that perspective. Okay, it's not about your right to like or dislike, or your right to have this preference or that preference. It's all unfolding regardless whether or not you like it, no matter what your preference is. And because of that, you have a choice. You can either try and stick to what your preference is or what your likes are and dislikes are, so that every time it rains, you're just going to get upset. But that's just going to be a cause of suffering. Okay. Or anytime somebody says something you don't like, you're just going to get upset. Now you may say, and again, and what you're doing is you're causing suffering because you're resisting what is. And we talked about resistance in the previous video, but this video as well has that idea of like resisting what is rather than accepting what is. Okay. And Singer also reminds us that it really is, it's a marvelous thing that the universe is here. Everything that's going on, everything that has to come together to form this moment. He says, if you weren't so busy with your likes and dislikes and worrying about what works for you, what doesn't work for you, then you'd be marveling at it all the time. But because we get bogged down and enmeshed and tangled within our own self, putting that or foisting that self onto the moments as opposed to just observing the moments, that takes us away from actually marveling what's going on. If we were able to untangle, we would just marvel over everything. And in later chapters, it seems that Singer, he doesn't like to talk about himself per se, but it seems like spiritual giants like Singer are able to really enjoy every moment because they have been able to entangle themselves from these moments so well. So think about that benefit of doing this spiritual work. You'll be able to enjoy moments which in the past you never could. And I know from personal experience as well, in the past, if something, that I didn't like happened, I would be going crazy about it and I couldn't accept it. Now, even when something that I don't like happens, let's say I go on a date and it's not a good date, for example, in the past, it would really annoy me and bother me. Of course, I'd rather have a good date. But if it doesn't go well, I've been able to enjoy the experience of it, to realize that even the bad, quote unquote, experience of this date is still an experience that I can enjoy. I can enjoy the badness of it. Okay. I know it sounds very counterintuitive and it may be hard to grasp, but as we continue to go through these videos, going through the book, it will start to become clearer and clearer. And again, your questions are welcome if things are unclear. Bearing in mind that a lot of your questions may be covered, probably will be covered in future videos, but still welcome to leave videos and to leave comments and feedback. And finally, Singer again kind of sums up the idea of spirituality, which is, he puts it so beautifully, coming into harmony with reality instead of trying to come into harmony with your personal self, wanting and hoping for everything to click into place every single time and every single moment to fit what you believe is the best and your best interests and what you need for you to be happy and all that stuff. That's not spirituality. That's trying to come into harmony with yourself. But what you want to do is work to come into harmony with the universe. Okay. And just remember that this isn't overnight work. It wasn't overnight for Singer. It's not overnight for me. It's an ongoing process, I would say, for as long as you live. It's always an ongoing process, but it does begin to settle in and you can absorb it, and you will, I could speak for myself. I've seen strides in it, so give it a chance, but don't expect these things to be overnight and don't judge or criticize yourself. But the more you work on this and the more you're spiritually aware and cognizant of these concepts, the more you're going to start to appreciate the moments in front of you more, as opposed to trying to always judge them, label them, and have your likes and dislikes and preferences and whatnot. Okay, so that concludes this video on the outside world, the first part of the three-winged circus. And the next video that we're going to talk about is the next part of the three-ring circus, being your thoughts, okay, the mind. That's the name of the next section in Singer's book, and that's what's going to be the next video in this series. Okay, so I've reminded you a bunch of times, one last time, that you're welcome to leave your questions and feedback, and it's always welcome. I'll do my best if there are specific questions to respond to those, and if you have anything to add, I would love to see that. Any sort of feedback, even if it's negative, criticism, that's fine as well. I'm always open to that. If it's something that will help me learn and grow from, and I think every comment would, then that's welcome as well. And it is appreciated. And I appreciate that you're watching this video and the previous video, and that you're along for the ride. And as always, don't forget to like this video. If you wouldn't mind just clicking that thumb up button, that helps me out, as well as subscribing to the channel. It does help me, and it does help you as well to make sure you don't miss any future videos. Okay, so thanks once again for visiting, and until next time, I'm looking forward to seeing you the next video. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that video. I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the channel. You'd not only be helping me, you'd also be helping yourself to not miss a future video. Your comments and feedback are always welcome. And don't forget to hit the actual like button on the video as well. Looking forward to seeing you at the next one.